So now I'm going to talk about the interpersonal domain. Counseling psychology, I think more so than many of the other helping professions like clinical psych, social work, marriage and family therapy, etc., puts a high priority on a person's interpersonal skills and sensitivity. And as I alluded to earlier when talking about letters of rec and transferable skills related to the clinical domain, there are a number of qualities that we look for in a good applicant that we think make a good colleague and make a good therapist. And the thing is, good therapists are good people. In order to do great therapy, you have to be pretty emotionally intelligent and interpersonally attuned, because we believe as counseling psychologists that our ability to create positive healing change for a client in part comes through the use of ourselves as an instrument in therapy. So how we are as a person with them can be curative in terms of building the therapeutic relationship, instilling hope in the client for their ability to change. Those sorts of things very much depend on our interpersonal presence, and clients need to trust us. They need to feel cared for by us. They need to feel warmth from us. And so if we can't channel those interpersonal properties, we're not going to do as good therapy as we can. Not all professionals will agree with what I just said. Some people feel that a therapist is just merely someone who's a good technician, someone who learns a bunch of techniques and can administer the techniques to clients, and that's what creates change. But for us, we very much think that the person and their interpersonal skill and warmth is an important factor. So, given that context, let me talk some about some of the qualities that a better applicant has compared to someone who is a less fitting applicant. So, the first quality is warmth. When I talk about warmth, it's kind of the interpersonal liking that you feel somebody. So, a warm smile, a feeling like somebody cares and is positive and exuding that positivity, that sort of warmth is something we value. And warmth is contrasted with coldness. Let me describe coldness. It is where someone, their emotions, they're kind of flat emotionally, or they're stoic most of the time. It's hard to maybe read what their emotional state is or what they're thinking, because they're just kind of a blank face. As we know, men in the U.S., at least white men, are socialized to be more stoic.
We have blankets as well.
And as a part of being stoic, we can sometimes come across as cold and unfeeling and kind of hard. So for me, having been socialized as a man in this country, I had to unlearn some of that tendency, that socialized masculine tendency, so that I could channel more of my warmth with people. So warmth instead of coldness is an important quality to exude. And again, these are qualities that you're hopefully showing to everyone in your personal and professional life, particularly to those who will be writing your letters, because they'll have the opportunity to comment on to what degree you show these interpersonal factors, including warmth. So not only is there warmth, but there's a sort of interpersonal awareness. And so what this can look like is, interpersonally, when you're engaged in conversation with somebody, not only are you taking the chance to speak and share your ideas and taking up some space, but you're also being aware of the nonverbal and verbal cues from your conversation partner. So if you're talking with somebody and you watch their face, you can often tell in their facial expressions when an idea comes across their head and they think of something they want to share. And so when we're talking, if we're talking and then we see a reaction on their part where it's like, ooh, looks like something popped into their head, it seems that they want to say something, then you can pause and say, what? And they can then have a chance to share that thing that popped into their head. So that's an example of being conscientious and aware of your conversation partner. Another thing is you want to balance how much space you take up with giving your conversation partner a chance to hold the floor and to speak. So to do this, we self-monitor, how long have I been talking? Has the other person had a chance to contribute 50% to the conversation? Have they talked in a while? And so if you find yourself talking at length, you can pause yourself and ask a question or open the floor for them to share what they've been thinking about or ask what they want to ask. So that's sort of being aware of how much space you take up in the room. And we all know people who, let's say in a class, there's oftentimes that one or two people who take up a lot of space in the class. And there's a fine line between speaking up and being an active participant and taking up too much space and hogging the time and making it harder for other people to contribute. So what's better for those people who are more prone to hogging space is if they would make their point, make their statement, and then give other people time. So to hold back something that they might want to say normally, but hold back so that other people have a chance to share equally in the discussion. So that shows an interpersonal awareness where we're balancing how much space we're taking up versus how much space other people are having a chance to fill. So that's another thing you want to demonstrate. And certainly in groups, smaller or larger, you'll have a chance to self-monitor how much space you take up. Another marker of interpersonal effectiveness is being a good listener. And there's a few components to this. But one is that as somebody's talking, you're able to display facial expressions and body language that shows that you're interested in paying attention to and valuing what the person says. So maintaining a lot of eye contact with them as they talk, although there can be cultural differences in terms of what's best, but for white folks, such as myself, interacting with another white person when somebody else is speaking, keeping eye contact with them 80-90% of the time is considered a demonstration of paying attention to them. So kind of leaning in, nodding your head occasionally when they make certain points or finish certain points shows that you're following. Using what's called minimal encouragers like yes, little bits like that show that you're following what they're saying. Smiling or allowing your emotional expressions to show depending on what they're saying. So if they're relating a happy story, then smiling when they get to a point when they smile and talk about something that's kind of happy, or showing concern or furrowing your brow when they talk about something that's disconcerting or sad. If they're talking about something frustrating, showing frustration, kind of aligning with them, like, oh, wow, that is really frustrating, God. Or, feigning scary, like kind of mock fright when they're talking about something that's scary, or kind of showing a sad, concerned face when they're talking about something that's sad and unfortunate. Kind of mirroring their own emotional reactions related to the story shows them that you're following along and you're kind of feeling along with them and what they're talking about. So those matched emotional reactions are a way to show that you're listening. Another thing is asking appropriate questions. That if you've been listening carefully and then you ask a question that's kind of a natural question that helps them go into more depth about a certain part of their story, so listening to what they're saying, asking that question that shows that you've been listening and want to know more about a certain piece. Likewise, restating what they said, paraphrasing it back to them shows that you've been following along. So if somebody says, man, I just had such a stressful week, I was doing this and that, and then my boss did this, and yada, 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 then you might say, oh man, everybody was really giving you a tough time. So you're kind of repeating back in a more concise way what they just said. It really shows that you've been following along and really hearing what they're saying. Likewise, reflecting the feeling that's present in what they're saying is another way that you can show that you're listening and following along. So if somebody, that person I was mimicking earlier, talks about, oh, I was just doing this and that and so busy and all these projects and people wanting this and wanting that, then you might think in your head, wow, that sounds really stressful. And so you can say something like that out loud, like, wow, it sounds stressful, or man, it makes me anxious just hearing about that, or oh boy, I feel so frustrated with having to deal with that. That sort of reflecting the feeling that's present in what they're saying is a way to kind of capture what they're probably feeling and make them really feel like you're attuned to emotionally what they're saying. So these are some of the markers of interpersonal effectiveness and emotional intelligence in terms of being connected with your own emotional experience. Oh, something else to mention too. Is that part of being interpersonally effective is, in order to do this, you need to be aware of your own emotional reactions and be able to share, speak about what emotions you're feeling, and being able to manage those emotional reactions when they're a little too intense. So one of the things that can make someone come across as cold and stoic is when they don't show their emotions on their face to some degree, or they don't talk about how they're feeling. They don't give their conversation partner too much information. They're kind of stoic and hard to read, hard to figure out what the person's feeling. That can be very disconcerting to someone, to be talking with someone where they can't read and doesn't seem to have any emotional reactions. So being willing to allow ourselves to notice what emotions we're feeling, to be aware of those, to name them, to allow them to be present rather than burying them somewhere or ignoring them or saying they're bad. And again, we've all been brought up by families and in cultures that have different things to say about when and how and to what degree showing certain emotions is okay. So that's, of course, something that's shaped this, but to the degree that you're able to be appropriately in tune with your emotions, that will help you be more interpersonally effective. Likewise, if you tend to have strong emotional reactions and they kind of carry you away and you lash out at people, or you're kind of overly expressive, especially the more negative emotions, if you kind of treat other people in a less good way when you're riding the wave of your emotions, then finding a way, whether it's through therapy or self-help or something else, finding a way to be able to better manage in a healthy way those more extreme emotions by, doing some deep breathing or disengaging from the situation, or using mindfulness, whatever it is. Being able to manage those more intense emotional reactions is important, because otherwise they might leak out or influence your behavior or make you lash out at people around you, or treat them poorly or whatever while you're trying to cope with that emotional experience. So again, these are some of the components of what makes interpersonal effectiveness, and the more of this you can be about and channel and live, the better. It will make you a better, more attractive candidate. But I should mention too that the thing is, each of us, given our genetics and how we've been socialized, will to different degrees have more of this interpersonal effectiveness as a natural part of what we do, and some will have less. I know for me personally, because of how I was socialized, I started off with less, and so I had to kind of catch up over the course of graduate school. My mentors and my instructors and my supervisors, very thankfully, were willing to help me grow as a person and become more interpersonally effective. And so we know that's the case for most applicants, and so we don't at all expect perfect people. We don't expect extremely interpersonally effective applicants, but we want to see the potential for interpersonal effectiveness in all our applicants, and you want to have at least a moderate degree of it. So we all have rough edges, that's okay. We all have growth edges and weaknesses that we can work on. But people want to see that fundamentally the people we're about to take on as advisees for the next 6 years or so are fundamentally good people. They are generally empathetic, generally warm, and have the capacity to strengthen that further. In contrast, we're really hesitant to take on somebody who doesn't seem interpersonally aware, who's kind of cold or aloof or hard to read, who isn't a good team player, who doesn't have good communication skills, who doesn't seem like they really have the capacity for empathy, because that's going to make learning to do therapy really hard. And it's going to make interacting with that person as a colleague kind of uncomfortable for people. So you do need a certain minimum level to be able to be a serious applicant, but we also recognize that there's growth to occur. And, I think for those of you listening where this is kind of a new concept, and I'm talking a lot about a lot of concepts that seem really foreign, it can be really scary and intimidating and things like that. But the thing is, don't let this worry you too much. Remember, I'm speaking about these things with 9 years of graduate experience and professional experience under my belt. So, you have to keep that in mind, that some of this will be less familiar, but hopefully some of it makes sense and you can kind of recognize some of these qualities in yourself. And if you find, in contrast, that this more warmth and interpersonally sensitive and conscientious stuff doesn't sound like you at all, you feel like you're really far from it, then that can mean one of two things. It might mean that just as a person, being a counseling psychologist would be less of a good fit for you, which happens. People's personalities and dispositions make them a better or less good fit for certain occupations. So some people who make great therapists won't make good accountants or attorneys. It's just kind of one of the facts of life. So in some ways, you might find that maybe counseling psychology is not a good fit if you can't channel that warmth and interpersonal effectiveness that would be necessary to do great therapy. However, it might not mean that. It might not mean that perhaps there is some growth that you need to take the time to get. So you need to become more intentional about improving your personality and your warmth, and being intentional about practicing being more conscientious in conversations and being more relatable and more warm. I mean, we work with clients all the time who have some interpersonal difficulties and conflicts and who need to learn some of these skills, and we help them learn that. So it's very possible for people to grow and learn in these ways. And to some degree, we're always going to be ourselves. Our kind of quirks and our fears and our personality tends to remain fairly stable over time, so says the research, but people can also grow and evolve. So you're never going to become a different person, but you can always become a better, more well-honed person. I know for me, I went from, fairly stoic-ish to pretty warm over the course of years, and I'm still and have always been myself, but I really grew as a person thanks to people who were willing to train me, and thanks to my own willingness to challenge my own typical ways of being, unlearn some things that my socialization had taught me, and grow to be a more empathetic and emotionally connected person. So I have come a long way, and the growth was painful at times, and certainly difficult, but extremely, extremely rewarding. So I know, having gone through it myself, that most people can themselves. But again, for some of you hearing me say this, you might say, I don't want to change at all. This sounds like too much work. I want my work to be completely unrelated to who I am as a person. I don't want to have to become a better person or a more polished person in order to do a certain job. Some of you may feel that way, and if that's the case, counseling psych may be less of a good fit for you, because I do believe that most counseling psychology professors are going to really require any serious applicant to have these good interpersonal qualities for them to be willing and comfortable taking you on as a student, because they've got to spend the next 5 or 6 years with you, and they don't want that to be a hellish experience. Another more subtle piece when it comes to the interpersonal effectiveness is how you display your competence. So, for example, when I was at Iowa State and I was teaching classes as a graduate student, I taught for 5 years as my assistantships. So I worked with a lot of students. And there would sometimes be some students who, in their desire to, I guess, prove to themselves or to show other people that they were sufficiently smart, they would adopt this kind of attitude and this style of interacting that came across as haughty or arrogant or snobbish, in that they would, if someone was, say, doing a presentation on a topic, they would ask tough questions that seemed to be designed to stump the presenter or make them seem foolish or unprepared, so that the student asking the question could kind of feel smug and like she was smart or he was smart and more prepared than the person doing the presenting. Or it would come in the form of asking questions of the instructor that seemed more designed to show the instructor that this person was thinking deeply about a given topic or another, rather than because they actually wanted to know or because the question was pertinent to the topic being discussed. It seemed more about showing the world that, hey, I can ask this really tough question or show that I do this outside reading or think about these other things, and it just didn't make the person look too humble when they acted like that. It can also manifest itself in terms of the person kind of picking fights or arguments with other people in class in terms of disagreeing or contradicting with the person, not in a warm way, but in kind of a haughty or gotcha or I think I know better than you do sort of way. And so that sort of arrogance or trying to prove the world that you're smart in that way does not make you look good in counseling psychologists' eyes. So I think that just about wraps up the interpersonal side of stuff.